Welcome to our HR leadership event. My name is Claudia Schwartz, and it is a pleasure to introduce our speaker, Phyllis Sarkaria. Phyllis is an accomplished HR executive, certified coach, facilitator, and trusted advisor. She works with leadership teams and individual leaders facing a range of strategic business challenges. She's a catalyst for elevating performance by building capacity for problem solving. Before founding her consulting firm, Phyllis worked at large corporations in roles including HR leadership, financial analysis, strategic planning, and government affairs. Phyllis is also a published scholar. Today, to discuss how we can apply the neuroscience of leadership to respond to what's next, please help me welcome Phyllis Sarkaria.
Thanks very much to you, Claudia, and to UCSD for the opportunity to speak to everyone today. You know, for a long time, I've been fascinated with understanding people and curious about how behavior is influenced. And that's one of the reasons why I find the research around neuroscience and how it applies to leadership so interesting. So regardless of where we are in the world today, we're living with unprecedented events, and those create challenges in the landscape of leadership. Understanding how to be your best during uncertain times and support your team is vital. So here's the situation, as best I can describe it. Lots of things swirling around right now. Beyond the personal impacts of balancing life, kids, elderly parents, roommates, whoever's in your household, there's also a heavy layer related to work. So let me see if I can capture the big picture with this list. Maybe you've had furloughs or layoffs, or perhaps you're considering those options. You could be thinking about how that impacts total rewards strategy, or worried about mental health support for your employees. Maybe your role's been reduced or eliminated personally. For those who are working remotely, you're thinking about how long is this going to go on? And if you do want to bring people back, what does that look like? If you've had to let people go or cut hours or pay, you're probably thinking about how to keep the rest of your staff. And that isn't even the full landscape of our reality. So as we get started, and I would like to ask that everyone mute their mics if they have not been muted, please. Here's a question. Please respond in the chat box. What is keeping you up at night related to work? And Claudia, my chat box has disappeared. So if you could share a few of the things that you're seeing there.
So some of the things that we are seeing are safety to employees, leaders not walking the talk, my lack of productivity, what's not getting done, furlough, layoffs, retention of employees, having to lay people off, compliance issues related to furloughs, whether I'll be employed or not in the near future. And are we getting leaders what they need most right now? How long it will be before I land a job as I was in search mode before this began? How to bring us all back to work once we can? Finding my next gig, returning to work plan. My job search will be stalled. How can I modify my processes so I can maintain my productivity? How to keep employees safe when we reopen? Job security, leadership engagement. How do I continue to network? How long will this pandemic last? When will it be safe to get our role players back to work?
Okay, so
there's no longer need, but yes.
There's a lot going on there. And I feel your pain. My goals today are to share concepts that will help you respond to these concerns from a place of deliberate action rather than reaction. And specifically, we're going to talk about 4 things you can do for yourself, 4 things you can do to support your team, however you define team, and then how to develop an action plan to start down the path. The concepts we'll discuss apply to our current situation and really to any crisis or uncertainty that can occur in the workplace. They are not magical solutions by any stretch, but they do require 3 characteristics. courage, humility, and discipline, because it's what we do as leaders, not what we know, that matters in the long run. And as we dive into this information, I want to encourage you to take time to crystallize your high-level thoughts and insights into concrete words by taking notes. The act of writing helps ensure that an insight isn't just a good idea, but it becomes hardwired and a part of who you are. So if you've been to one of my talks before, you know I prefer interactive sessions. This is our maiden voyage with webinars, and both Claudia and I appreciate that you're along for the ride. I will be asking questions along the way so that your perspectives will add to the story. And Claudia may jump in occasionally with a question or insight. We will also pause midway for questions. So if you have a question or a thought to share at any time, please type it in the chat box, which Claudia will be monitoring. We may not necessarily get to all the questions, but we'll try to put them into groups so that we can answer generally the questions that are being asked. So let's get rolling. Now, I don't know about any of you, but it feels to me a bit like we're caught in a social experiment. It's week 8 for my husband and I since we started self-isolation. And for us, that means limited trips to the grocery store, where I will admit empty shelves are still a shock to my system. You know, worries about the economy, concerns about the health of family members, disruption to schedules overall. Does this sound familiar to anyone else? Whether this triggers in us a sense of mild discomfort or outright anxiety, our experience with COVID-19 demonstrates, and neuroscience validates, that unanticipated, unexpected change can quickly plunge us into fear or threat mode. And this is true even in good times, when we face perceived threats to things like our autonomy, our status, or perhaps treatment that we feel is unfair. Now, I'm not going to talk today about the neocortex or the amygdala, that's also known as the reptilian or primitive brain. I'm not going to get into the mechanics and anatomy of neuroscience. I will discuss, though, how our primitive brain hijacks our thinking brain. Instead, I really want to focus with you on the thing to make a positive difference for themselves and their teams, based on some insights from brain research, and how it takes intentional humility, courage, and discipline to do those things well. So one of the more debilitating things about the pandemic is the majority of us are feeling some level of anxiety because of a lack of certainty. How long will this go on? It's the kind of things that are keeping you up at night. Will the virus come back? Is my job secure? When will things get back to normal? And what does normal mean anyway? Uncertainty registers in our brains as a tension, an error, something that has to be corrected before we feel comfortable again. That's why our brains are hardwired to crave certainty. We are wired to address the error and move on. And not knowing what will happen next can exhaust us because it requires extra neural energy. And that diminishes memory, undermines performance, and disengages people from the present. And actually, that bears repeating. Uncertainty diminishes memory, undermines performance, and disengages us from the present. So if you've been feeling unfocused, forgetful, and worried over the past few weeks, or you've seen that in others that you work with, practice a little self-compassion and compassion for them. Your brain is working overtime. We're just human, and it's okay to feel that way. It can actually be hard to bring courage, humility, and discipline to our leadership when there are a lot of emotions swirling around. We need the ability to recognize and diffuse our reactions when we get stuck in uncertainty and our emotions begin to take over. Did you know that emotions have a physiological life of 90 seconds? And maybe as I bring in some of these pictures, you'll have emotional reactions to one or more of them. However, in spite of that neurological proof of the 90-second chemical reaction when we experience an emotion, any one of us could point to significant events in our lives, both happy and sad, often from years ago, that still bring raw emotions to the surface. And why is that? We tend to feed, nurture, and extend the life of emotions, usually without even realizing it. Because our reptilian brain craves simplicity, simple stories that categorize events into a binary yes or no, good or bad category, Our brains tell us a story, and then we react to the story rather than the facts. Often we convince ourselves that the story is factual, is the truth. And that happens in the blink of an eye, every day with leaders and their team members, family members. It can happen with complete strangers on the freeway. Think how powerful it is when we train our brains to recognize the stories for what they are, catch our emotions before they trigger us, pause, return to the moment, and reflect. Now, recognizing the human tendency to grab onto explanations to calm our brains, reduce anxiety, and preserve energy, here's another question for you. Please respond in the chat box. At any moment since the lockdown began, has your brain been hijacked by your emotions? So Claudia, this may be a lucky guess, but I'm guessing that yes, and yes is an understatement, are probably getting most of the votes. So think about it. That means the stress you're feeling is largely self-induced. When our brains hijack our emotions and our bodies go into fight or flight reactions, we're creating our own stress. And while we're currently in a shared experience of uncertainty, beyond COVID-19, think about how often there's ambiguity in the workplace. If we want to manage stress and improve performance, the more we can do as leaders to recognize and address that ambiguity around what's next, involve people in a response, and work towards solutions together, the greater our chances are to reduce anxiety, both our own and others. And anxiety is energy without a goal, which is quite simply exhausting for everyone. Now, it isn't always easy to reduce anxiety, though. It takes a certain amount of courage and a good deal of focus. As leaders, we have to become more comfortable with being uncomfortable. I don't know about you, but I really struggle with that. I like being able to figure things out and find a clear path forward, whether it's for myself or team I might be working with. And I want to solve problems, bring solutions, help others fix themselves. And sometimes it's easier to be comfortable with discomfort than other times. I mean, often we have to act in spite of not having clarity or complete information. Or maybe try something new, like a webinar instead of an in-person presentation. And all of that requires humility to accept that we may stumble along the way, but we'll figure it out together. So a lot of things are not within our control right now. But one thing always is, we have a choice over how we act and how we respond to the circumstances that we find ourselves in. So let's talk first about things you can do for yourself. Now, this picture, I chose this because it reminds me of the State Plains of West Texas where I grew up. There's nothing between the Canadian border and you except some barbed wire and a few rangy cattle. Storms can blow up literally in the blink of an eye, where the day goes from sunny with blue skies to wind-whipped, blowing sand, pelting rain. In some ways, it's a good metaphor for the way things have felt the last month or so. Think about it. The economy was red hot. Anything was possible. Suddenly, we're in the midst of the storm of COVID-19, and we're struggling to imagine how to move beyond the aftermath. It can be easy to lose focus when you're in the middle of a storm. And uncertainty doesn't just stem from anxiety around economic and medical health. It's a way of life and business. So what does it mean to focus on what you can control? Well, there's 4 points I'd like you to take away from this particular measure. First of all, be in the moment. I miss the way things were, but ruminating on that doesn't bring it back. And worrying about what's next, and I am a champion worrier, doesn't change the outcome. Focusing on the present moment can actually be rather uplifting, and it allows greater focus to how to move forward. You know, what we pay attention to allows us to be either afraid or filled with admiration. For example, instead of freaking out by constantly checking the COVID-19 news, we can choose to pay attention to the millions of people worldwide who are selflessly serving others. Their bravery and devotion can fill us with the kind of awe that feels good. And that's just one example that can help us be more productive. As we do that, we're better positioned to choose our attitude and how we'll respond to the events we come into play with. Because while we can sometimes influence outcomes to a certain extent, and many of us operate with at least an illusion of control, the reality is that ultimately the only thing we can control for sure in most situations is ourselves, our attitude, and the choices we make to be engaged, conscious of our reactions, and thoughtful about our response. Now, what else can we do? So does anyone else find it ironic and maybe slightly amusing that toilet paper has become a defining symbol of this significant and serious global crisis? Saying don't panic seems obvious, doesn't it? Not necessarily easy in the moment though, because we get triggered. Think about the 90-second life of an emotion. Triggers are the things that cause that uneasy feeling or reaction that can extend the life of that emotion. When we're more fully present in the moment, it's easier to recognize that we've been triggered. And then we can be intentional about taking a deep breath, separating unconscious instinct-based reactions from more thoughtful responses, and recall that there are options. And options give you power. Now, here's a question to consider, and I would encourage you to write down your answer because I want you to look at that in just a minute. What are your triggers these days? Now, leader moods tend to be picked up by the team. So it's important to get your inner state in a place where you can be effective in your leadership regardless of the crisis of the moment. So look at what you noted and may still be noting as your triggers. How can you bring more awareness to those events?
Phyllis,
yes.
Your statement about anxiety was so good. I actually made a note and a couple of people asked for you to repeat it. So
Absolutely.
Anxiety is energy.
Yes. Anxiety is energy without a goal, which is exhausting. So as you bring more awareness to the events, the awareness of that inner state requires curiosity and attention. Who and what pushes your buttons? Can you be mindful when you're exposed to those people or situations? Are you able to intentionally slow down and control your reaction and choose your response? Some of this comes from regularly checking in with yourself. What am I feeling? Why am I reacting this way? Observing yourself creates capacity to control your behavior. Now, if you're feeling particularly brave and are prepared to be humbled, you might actively seek feedback from others. Where do they see you being triggered? We can learn a lot when we're open to it, and it requires humility to acknowledge that we aren't perfect and courage to want to improve. But whether asking for input from others or monitoring ourselves, certainly when we're paying attention, we have more opportunity to recognize and diffuse our own emotional triggers and see where we have opportunities to grow. The act of paying attention creates chemical and physical changes in the brain. Repeated, purposeful, and focused attention can lead to long-lasting personal evolution. Now, an important note here, this is not about pushing away feelings. So do not discount your feelings or those of others. They're very real. What I'm talking about is being more aware of what you're feeling and why. And this is particularly important when we're under stress, because when stress is present, it's easy to be triggered and to trigger others. So paying attention to your own triggers has another positive side effect. As you notice reactions in yourself, you can begin to notice them in others also. You might want to practice naming your emotions and then identify the physical sensations associated with them. Write them down, call them out. For example, when you're stressed, disrespected, sensing conflict, whatever your triggers are, do you tense your shoulders or feel a tightness in the pit of your stomach? Does your body temperature increase? Do you have trouble sleeping when you're anxious? Maybe you lose your appetite or experience mental turmoil. So, what physical reactions do you tend to have when you feel stressed? Often when people are nervous, they take more shallow breaths. Can you identify as that happens to you? Do you notice it in others? All of these are signs that the instincts deep in the primitive brain are about to hijack our capabilities for higher thinking. So, however anxiety manifests in you, when you feel yourself being triggered to react to a story, not facts, and again, this requires that you're paying attention. When your brain is being hijacked, slow down and take a few deep breaths. It sounds simplistic, but it may not be easy when your brain is already moving rapidly toward fight or flight. If you can be intentional about slowing down and refocus your thoughts, actually doing basic math, whether it's 2 + 2 = 4, or counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to yourself, can actually re-engage your thinking brain and bring you to the present. So in addition to increasing awareness, doing this requires a measure of self-compassion because none of us are perfect. Perhaps some courage and a bit of resilience. So let's talk about resilience. Resilience isn't just powering through rough patches. It's essentially the time it takes for you to calm down from being upset. And I want to focus on a particular aspect of resilience because we need to take care of ourselves so that we have the strength, energy, and flexibility to weather stressful times and move forward and take care of others. I'm not referring to a spa day here, though I'm a big fan of those. At a minimum, self-care is about things like eating food that's good for you, getting enough rest, but not too much, kind of staying on a schedule, keeping moving, and finding some sense of balance, however you define that. So these basics can take you a long way. Some of us, and I'll speak for myself here, are motivated to help others. In fact, we feel selfish if we're not giving, solving, and contributing. Self-care is not selfish, nor is self-compassion. So cut yourself some slack. Not engaging in self-care can lead to an increase in anxiety and self-induced stress, and that leads to bad decisions. So these are things you can do and should do on a regular basis so that you can bring your best to all the roles you play in life, so that you can be more resilient in the face of uncertainty. Now, maybe you think you're pretty resilient already. How many of these statements would you say are mostly or always true about you? These are all measures of resilience and things you can work on if you want to build your reserves. So I've got 2 more questions for you to consider, and I hope you'll share your responses in the chat box. So I'm going to be calling on Claudia as my partner here to help me since I'm a little blind on the chat box. So how are you taking care of yourself these days? And related to that, what activities do you find restorative, and how can you make these a priority? So what are a few examples, Claudia, of things coming in?
While we wait for some answers to come, someone asked if the slides will be shared, and Phyllis?
Yes, I believe we'll be passing along. I've got a 1-pager of highlights that will definitely go out, and then Claudia and I will coordinate on sharing other information with you.
Yes, thank you, Phyllis. Some of the ways that we're all taking care of ourselves include getting extra rest, walking, making it a priority to walk, yoga, exercise and rest, running, meditation, sewing masks for the hospital.
I love it.
Yeah, during days off, excellent idea. Getting at least 30 minutes walk, jog in every day, okay. one person, we really appreciate your candor, by the way, said that no, they're not taking good care of themselves. And so, yeah.
And you're
Thank
not
you for
alone.
Acknowledging. Mm-hmm.
You're
Yes,
not alone.
not at all.
But maybe you're getting some ideas from things that other people are sharing. Because in order to be resilient, to remain calm and have the energy to weather stress, self-care is really important. Yeah. So it's necessary for us to be our best, especially if we want to be there for others.
Yes. Here's an interesting.
Yeah, go ahead, Claudia.
Another interesting idea for self-care: brain games. And there are many apps and subscription services that you can sign up for that offer wonderful brain game activities. So thanks for bringing it up. Excellent idea.
Yeah, another great idea is we've talked about having the humility to look inside yourself for how you can improve and the courage to try new things. Brain games might be one of them. But self-care may be something new that you need to try in order to be even more resilient than you already are.
Yes. Here's another example: learning journaling. So keeping a journal, that can be so constructive, right?
That's great. Well, maybe we can capture some of the stuff from the chat and share it with the attendees. We'll have to talk about that offline, Claudia.
Yes, and gardening and Zumba and cooking. I guess if you cook, then you need the Zumba exercise. So that's right. A combination. Mindfulness classes and taking time away from the desk and going for a walk, creative activities, old hobbies, wine on the patio, okay. Making art. Yes, excellent ideas.
Yeah, that's terrific. Well, we often expect our lives to go a certain way, and then we get thrown off course by illness, a job change, or unexpected events like maybe a global pandemic. It's natural to feel uneasy when abrupt change occurs, but recovering from that, being resilient, means being able to more quickly adapt. Now, I'm going to shift gears here and talk a little bit about things you can do for the teams that you work with, that you support. Before I do that, though, Claudia, I wanted to see if any questions have been asked that we might want to touch on.
No, I don't see questions per se, but if you have questions, please use the chat box. We would love to hear.
Yeah. So I would encourage you, I will take questions at the end as well. So start sending in those questions now if you have them. So while you're focusing on what you can control, being more present and intentionally responding rather than reacting, as well as taking care of yourself so you can take care of others, you may be thinking, well, what else do I need to do? Let's talk about 4 ways you can support your team. What you can do as a leader to help them be their best. Because when we're present and available for our team members, communicate regularly with them to reduce ambiguity, provide support, and stay flexible to update them as the situation warrants, our teams are much more likely to experience less stress and anxiety, think more clearly, and function better. Now, sometimes we think all we need to do is tell team members what to do, and they'll get it. But that rarely works. I mean, think about the actions I've just discussed in terms of taking care of yourself. I can tell you all day long, and maybe you were even aware of those, but until you create your own path, it's unlikely much will change. And in a similar way, if you want to affect positive change for your team, when you need to lead others and have unwavering determination to be the kind of leader people seek out when they feel uncertain, the leadership equivalent of barking is not going to make a sustainable difference. Yet when we're stressed, it can be easy to fall back into that comfort zone. And perhaps you're seeing this with some of your managers. I think someone mentioned, sort of leadership not walking the talk. Adam Grant, the psychologist and author, offered this question on LinkedIn that's really more rhetorical than an actual question. And as you look at that, I would add an additional choice for all of us in leadership. What are we doing to support our team members rather than tell them what to think, feel, and do? Now, hopefully, we aren't doing this. As leaders, we often move quickly into persuasion, hoping to motivate and inspire employees or perhaps just hoping to get our point across. There's a time and place for persuasive tactics, but did you know that persuasion is perceived within the brain of the recipient as a psychological threat to freedom? Even when acts of persuasion are subtle, the brain's instinct is to push back against it as a suspicious activity, and it can actually make people seem defensive. It's the mind's way of restoring a sense of freedom. And by moving away from actively attempting to persuade others, and perhaps yourself, you can create conditions that enhance the brain's ability to adjust and perceive change as non-threatening. So let's face it, we are in the midst of massive change. And since none of us have been in this particular place before, do any of us really have the answer? So let's get to those 4 things you can do with your team and the entire leadership team in your organization. All of these can make a positive difference. First is perhaps really obvious. Communicate frequently and as openly as possible. Research has shown that leaders can reduce anxiety and stress during times of change through their behavior. And there is a ton of research out there, with ton actually being a technical term, that the attitude of a leader is infectious. Leader moods tend to be picked up by the team. So when we get our own inner state in a better place, we can be more effective in our leadership of others, regardless of the crisis of the moment. So while we're thinking about how to stop the spread of a highly infectious viral contagion, let's also be more aware of how our attitudes and our interactions infect, influence, and impact others. Share information when you can, as well as touch base with team members frequently. Because frequent communication can dispel rumors, and it helps team members retain focus by keeping them informed. Our highest performance comes from brains that are calm, centered, focused, able to see possibilities, and be creative. Whenever we're dealing with change and uncertainty, there's a certain sense of being in a fog. Have you ever driven into a thick fog bank? One where you can barely see the road ahead? I know when that happens to me, I slow way down and I inch along, perhaps saying a prayer that I don't run off the road or hit something, or that no one hits me. What a relief when the sky clears. So helping your team focus on what they personally can control, giving them a sense of control, can help to lift some of that fog. You want to be an ambiguity absorber, not an ambiguity amplifier, to borrow a phrase. So what does that mean? Well, your team needs to hear from you frequently so they stay informed and productive. They also need an opportunity to be heard. Now, many of us have dual responsibilities where we're responsible for doing as much as for leading. Yet a key aspect of any leader's job is to support team members. So a second principle here is to be present and available for your team members, especially now. This is a time to prioritize empathy. It requires that we're brave enough to witness and understand people's immediate experience and concerns, even when we can't resolve them. During stressful times, understanding human nature provides insights and tools for leaders who are willing to lean into issues with openness and curiosity and calmly guide team members to create focus for whatever comes next. We may not be able to sit down with colleagues and team members like this right now, but we can still prioritize empathy. So give this a try. Let go of your agenda at the start of every interaction. Don't dive into action items immediately. Yes, you should be a straightforward, open communicator. And that is as much about listening as it is about talking. So what if you started conversations with a simple question? How are you? I just want to check in on you. Then stop talking and listen. It's a proverbial arm around the shoulder that we're in this together. It takes humility and discipline, and yes, it takes time, but it's an investment that will pay dividends, because people who are worried, scared, anxious, or otherwise distracted are not going to be productive, make good decisions, or move in any kind of cohesive direction. It can be tempting for leaders to paint a compelling vision of the future, but the reality is that people are focused on now. So your job as a leader is not to persuade them to feel differently or even to validate their feelings, but rather to acknowledge that you hear how they feel. Then help them focus on what they can control. Because for each of us, control comes from being in the moment and choosing our attitude and reaction. So the principles that apply for you can also be helpful for your team members. Right now, showing empathy may be the most important thing you can do for productivity, performance, innovation, retention, for any meaningful outcome. People want to be heard. So just listen, hear their story. If you feel a response is needed, consider asking questions to help them build capacity within themselves to find solutions. Now, the third and fourth points go hand in hand. Own your decisions and focus on problem solving, not blame. And be willing to assess, revise, and evolve as the situation changes. Because yes, it takes discipline and courage to make reality clear, especially when the way forward is uncertain for you also. You might not be able to make predictions, but you can still offer informed interpretations, and that reduces ambiguity for others. You become that ambiguity absorber. On the flip side, those who micromanage and overanalyze increase stress and anxiety. Those leaders amplify ambiguity and cause indecision because people actually wait to be told what to do. So be open about what will happen as information's decided. I mean, we're starting to bring people back to work, or we will be soon. In conversation with employees, can you explain what will change about how they do their work and what will stay the same? What are their key priorities now? And who needs to do what right now? Answering those questions is a good starting place. Here's the good news. While our brains crave certainty, you don't have to have all the answers. And if you pretend that you do, they're going to see through it anyway. Sometimes reality includes admitting you're still working on solutions. And maybe your team members have ideas that can help. So our reality, especially right now, is that what we know is changing rapidly and our actions will change accordingly. So don't be afraid to say that. And if you can be disciplined to keep team members focused on their performance and help them manage events, and if you can have the humility to seek out their input and ideas, all these things are things they can control. And that gives them purpose. And purpose is a powerful stabilizer.
Yeah. Phyllis, there's a related question in a way. The question was, give us an example of how to respond when employees and people we're talking to tell us their fears.
It's, of course, every situation is going to be a little different. But one of the basic things you can do, and this is the idea of rather than reinforcing their fears, it's acknowledgement. To say, I hear you, I understand. And it's okay to say, you know, a lot of people are feeling that way. Mm-hmm. This is part of the prioritizing empathy, where this is a very human situation. And when we're dealing with a lot of uncertainty, maybe you can share some of the things that are takeaways from this presentation. When we're dealing with a lot of uncertainty, it's not surprising that people have fears.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you're saying that.
Yeah. I was just going to say, don't feel, the important thing is don't feel that you have to fix their fears, that you have to calm them or make those fears go away. Those of us who are really focused on solutions often go in with our hammer and our screwdriver and we want to fix, we want to repair, when really our job should be more about illumination. Bring the flashlight, leave the other tools at home.
Yes. And so much of the anxiety and fear is to feel out of control. So your last slide, focusing on what we can control, very often they want to hear from us questions that will help them identify what can they really control.
Yes. And giving people a purpose, helping them be part of a solution, inviting them to the dialogue and to collaborate with you on solutions. Get their ideas.
Right. And we want to hear more about the team intelligence. And let me ask you just one more question that came in.
Okay.
How can you help people see the facts and not their version of the facts?
Well, remember, we want to stay away from persuasion. So often we go to, I'm going to keep telling you the facts because you're not seeing them. I have found that instead exercising curiosity to just ask, is that really what happened? Tell me again, how this unfolded, where you're starting to ask questions to get them to think differently. And maybe even say, I'm going to play devil's advocate here. What if that wasn't true? What if what you have convinced yourself of is not true? How would it make things different? I've found in my coaching that that's a very powerful question, because if you can actually get people to open up and consider that what they've convinced themselves is true is not, what are other explanations other than the one that you've decided on? Because leadership is not about diminishing or dismissing worries. I mean, it really is modeling calm in the face of ambiguity and communicating clearly and really listening to your team members, as we've been talking about. You can serve and support your team members while work's in progress. And increasing team intelligence, what I like to call WEQ, requires leaders who can exercise their humility to be real and be human and pay extra attention to people right now. We have to resist that human instinct when we're facing uncertainty so that we don't take the wrong actions. And instinct, in the form of our primitive brain, says, play it safe, wait for more information, don't upset the team by sharing bad news, and don't change course or people might question your leadership. However, what's required in a crisis is to be present and act with urgency. Communicate regularly, acknowledge missteps, and focus on the way forward, not pointing fingers. And further, establish, especially in rapidly changing environments, constantly review and updating our plans. It's going to be necessary. Being willing to revise plans and evolve as the situation changes and new information becomes available is a clear differentiator for effective leadership. So as you rise to the challenge during times of crisis or uncertainty, your actions will help team members focus on what they can control, their attitude, their performance, and the present moment. It's the not knowing what's next that produces results that are not good for any of us. And whenever we're in the midst of unprecedented uncertainty, we may not know the end of the story yet, whether for ourselves or our team members, but displaying courage, humility, and discipline by focusing on one step at a time and setting near-term milestones along the way can help us all steer through the fog. Stay in the moment and develop a plan to move forward. Now, remember when we started, one of my stated goals, actually all of my stated goals were to talk with you about things you can do for yourself, to share things you can do for your team, and to help you develop an action plan to move forward. So to get to an action plan, I'm going to ask you to write. So this is a simple exercise that will show you a way forward. Our brains are always prioritizing, and stress impacts memory. So it is not early onset of Alzheimer's that you can't remember what you had for dinner last night. The act of writing something down not only captures an idea, it activates memory. Now, hopefully you've already been taking notes, and if so, you're a step ahead. So I'm going to stop talking for a couple of minutes and give you time. I would ask that you please jot down 3 or 4 pieces of information you've learned today that you can put into action. Okay, now we're going to pivot. To deepen your learning, I'd like to ask you to think about next week, all the things you need to do. the people you'll be working with. Bring those people and tasks to mind. Look at your 3 or 4 bullet points, the things you wrote down. As you review what you've written down, answer these 3 questions. First, as you think about next week in these takeaways, what is one thing you can start doing differently based on your list? As you think about the week ahead and you think about your list, what's one thing you can stop doing? And finally, what's one action or behavior you've already been doing that you definitely want to continue? When you answer those 3 questions, you will have an action plan. And if you're comfortable sharing your takeaways or your action plan in the chat box, I'd love to see them. And I'm hoping I'll have access to it after the webinar is over. So Claudia, I believe we've got time for some questions. If anyone has questions, please type them in the chat box and we will do our best to respond.
Sure. Phyllis, there was a request for you to repeat the statement about leaders who micromanage.
Oh, okay. Yes, that was with respect to ambiguity amplifiers. Those who micromanage tend to actually increase anxiety and stress in others.
Excellent. One participant made a very wise comment that was, the only thing we can control is ourselves. Practice using the flashlight versus the hammer.
Great takeaway.
Yes, and here's a question. We've talked about ourselves and our teams. Any different thoughts about our families, including adult children, college age, and teens?
You know, family introduces interesting dynamic. All of these things still apply because we're talking about people. And so the question is, rather than operating in the usual patterns of interaction, because quite often we behave at our worst actually with family members because they're going to love us, we hope, regardless, and we have to behave when we're around the people we work with. But consider, rather than telling, can you open up your curiosity and just listen? Ask questions and listen.
Yeah. Phyllis, can you back to the slide with the action planning questions?
Yes. Let me see. There we go.
Yes. Thank you. So some of the sharing that we are seeing, action plans. Number 1, model calm, prioritize empathy, start conversations with how are you, and listen. Don't persuade or try to fix others.
Yeah, great things can come out of, this is a very simple start, stop, continue exercise. But great things can come out of it for individuals and even for teams to have discussions around this.
Yes. So there was a question earlier that was more targeted towards the HR professionals' response to CEOs who want to have employees back to their seats, quote unquote, even though that might not be necessary or make sense any longer.
So my question, I have more questions than answers for someone like that, because I would go in trying to find out what is the end result that this CEO desires. Because it's thinking about actually the slide with the and I'm going to see if I can back up here. The question, or the rhetorical question from Adam Grant there. Sometimes we have leaders who can't trust people to work from home. They have, for some reason, that's going on. Now, we don't necessarily want to point out to them any of these factors, but finding out what it is about what's going on in the leader's mind as to why they need people back in place. Is this how they deal with their own uncertainty? Because they're trying to create a sense of normalcy. What other options are available? Now, sometimes we work with dictators and there is only one answer. But hopefully by asking questions to get to, what problem are we trying to solve, or just what outcome, what's the ideal outcome? And if the ideal outcome is, I want everyone physically here, so what is the result? It's continuing to peel back the layers. What is the result you're wanting? That hopefully would get that leader to think a little bit differently, or at least just consider other options. There's usually more than one way to respond to a challenge.
Many. Next question. With regard to self-care, how can I overcome my feeling of being selfish when taking time to take care of myself versus taking care of others?
Great question. And I sometimes struggle with that as well. It's that guilty feeling that I should be doing a lot of other things rather than this kind of thing. I think fundamentally understanding that it's the old airline analogy of, put on your mask first before you help anyone else with their mask. Years ago, I was told a story about lions in Africa, which a friend of mine has debunked, who's been on safari. So I still like the analogy. So even though apparently it's not a true story, I'm going to tell you. What is true is that female lions are the hunters in a lion pride. And so they are the ones who go out and bring down the kill. And in order for the entire lion pride to be healthy and well fed, the female lions have to be healthy to do the hunting. And so they get to eat first. Now, my friend who's been on a safari told me that actually that's not true. The Lion King always eats first. But the female lions are next because there's a recognition by the members of the pride that in order for everyone to do well, the lioness has to be taken care of. So it's a slight change in maybe thinking about it as it's not selfish. If I really want to continue to give my best to others, I need to do this.
Yes. Excellent. So we only have 2 minutes. So unfortunately, we don't have time to address all of the questions. And Phyllis, and everyone, I have to commend you for all the comments, and thank you participants for making the comments that, Phyllis, your slides are excellent, and you have done an outstanding job with the webinar format. And thank you for letting us know, participants, that you actually enjoy this format. You like to participate this way, and in great part because, Phyllis, you made it really interactive and meaningful for us, particularly for HR professionals who are always taking care of others, and you're focusing on us as well. So,
well, thank you to everyone for your time and attention. I've really enjoyed sharing these ideas with you. And I'll be working with Claudia to make sure all of you get this one-page summary with some additional information that you can check out to learn more.
Thank you so much, Phyllis, and everyone for participating. And by the way, stay tuned. Invitations should come out today for the next webinar format. It is going to be on the 3rd of June at 10:30 a.m. And it is going to be bouncing back the next normal for employment law with Jennifer Lutz and Jennifer Suberlak from Petticone and Gracia Lutz and Dolan. And we're thrilled to have them as well. So they're accepting questions in advance of that event next month. So when you get the invitation, there will be an email and you can submit questions. So that is the coming attractions. But most of all, Phyllis, thank you so much. And if we were in person, we would be giving you a standing applause here. So yeah. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for participating this morning.
And stay safe and healthy, everyone.
Thank you.